We've been sold this story, the idea of the perfect startup, unicorns they call them. We idolize the Facebooks and Ubers of the world and are taught that the best startups bleed investor money for years until they have a monopoly and then price gouge their customers into oblivion. That is not my dream. I get that it makes a lot of money for some people, but even when it goes exactly according to plan, that seems like a terrible experience for everyone involved. My perfect startup is Angus Chang's bank statement converter. This might be the most boring website you could think of. It just takes bank statement PDFs and converts the transactions into a CSV format. But Bank Statement Converter is a perfect playbook for creating a successful startup. Both its successes and its failures act as a guide for entrepreneurs who want to make it on their own, without going into crippling debt. This is a simple application with very little maintenance that is returning over $20,000 in profits to its founder every month. I don't want to idolize companies with bogus valuations and unrealistic investor expectations. This is a product that is just making money on the internet by providing value and charging a fair price. It doesn't get any better than that. Angus Chang was always going to be an entrepreneur. He had already quit his job to chase his dream and had some good savings from his previous successful venture, Girlfriend Simulator X. Nope, this is not a joke. He was eager to start his next project, but none of them were quite clicking. He eventually wanted to get a better understanding of how much he was spending to gauge how long his savings would last. His bank only allowed him to download his transactions through PDF statements. Being a software engineer, he decided that this was a job for the computer, so he quickly coded up a script that passed for PDF and created a CSV instead. This was how the idea for Bank Statement Converter was born, proving once again that the best ideas come from solving your own problems. As a entrepreneur, I think you may be better off keeping a list of problems you encounter instead of ideas for businesses. The issue with solving your own problems is that unless you run a business, your resulting problems will be business to customer, or B2C. But if your dream is to provide value in exchange for money, then you are almost always better off with a business-to-business or B2B venture. That is because customers will do almost anything to avoid spending more money, while businesses will happily pay if you're delivering value. Luckily for Angus, the problem he encountered is very applicable to businesses. Accountants, for example, can save hours of their time by automatically converting bank statements. After converting his own statements, Angus realized that other people may be encountering the same issue. He decided he was going to try and turn this into a marketable product. The first commit for Bank Statement Converter was written in March 2021. It was released right when all developers were obsessing over Web3, and only a year before all developers were obsessing over AI. It grew healthily through both of those trends. Sometimes it feels like the only way to be successful is to catch the latest trend at the perfect time and to capture a market before anyone else does. But that's simply not true. Plenty of smaller businesses still have problems that are unsolved or could be solved in a more convenient way. This idea isn't an idea that is particularly unique. Bank Statement Converter just solves a real problem for small businesses and charges a fair price. I actually prefer ideas that aren't completely unique. Something with an existing market means that people are willing to pay for this problem. If a product doesn't exist, it either means that I am the first to think of something, or it isn't financially viable. And one of those options is far more likely than the other. And you don't have to be the best in the world, just a little more convenient for some people. 37 Signals mentions this idea of the Fortune 5 million, as opposed to the Fortune 500. Businesses with 1 or 2 people or small teams still have plenty of unsolved problems. Everyone is focusing on the 500 most profitable companies and neglecting the businesses that aren't in a winner-take-all market. Don't be so quick to rule out SaaS products as saturated and lacking innovation. Bank Statement Converter is a perfect example of a modern SaaS product that works. The first thing Angus did after getting a working prototype was team up with a designer. That in itself may already be a lesson. As software engineers, I think the last thing we tend to do is hire a designer. We don't tend to care about how things look, but UI and UX is important. If you're building a SaaS product, you're tackling a market by building an experience that is more convenient for some people. It would be nice if people actually wanted to use your product. Angus knew that he would never make a great UI, so he got his friend Dom to come and help with the product, which clearly paid off. The product today doesn't look very different from the original design Dom came up with. Angus isn't afraid to outsource anything that he isn't good at or even just doesn't want to do. He invited Dom to be a co-founder so that he had someone to do the front end. He later hired someone on Fiverr to collect bank statements from different banks. This isn't just about covering your weaknesses, it's also about enabling you to focus on your role as much as possible. Tasks that aren't directly correlated to value can be delegated to someone else. Your focus is on making the product great and making sure it survives long term. Obviously, outsourcing doesn't always go well. Even later in the project's life, Angus hired someone to do some cold email marketing. He paid $600 upfront and the person he was in contact with just stopped replying. You should still have a solid foundational understanding of the tasks you are outsourcing so that you can quickly tell who is legit and who isn't. Dom was brought in as a co-founder early on and essentially designed the interface that Bank Statement Converter still uses to this day. But he never got to see any of the profits because he left before the project started making any money. Bank Statement Converter wasn't an immediate cash cow. It actually hemorrhaged money for a long time before turning a profit. Even for self-funded businesses, you still have to make sacrifices. These things don't often come easily. For Angus, the bleeding came directly from the cost of running ads on Google. Conventional advice is to start out doing things that don't scale, cold calling customers and finding customers one at a time. Angus hated the idea of doing this, so he went for another approach and took the L on advertising cost. I think both approaches can work. In a project's infancy, it is worth losing money on ads or losing time on sales, as long as you can prove that people are actually using the app. Google Ads is not an efficient form of marketing, but it casts a wide net and it gives you a signal as to whether anyone will actually use your product. If you can't convince anyone to click on your ad, then it's a good indication that you're never going to turn a profit. This is how Angus was essentially using Google Ads. The numbers did not add up. At times he was spending 7 times what he was making. But some people were actually using the app and then sticking around and using it more. This gave Angus the confidence to keep going solo, to try and make the product more profitable and his marketing channels more efficient. Bank Statement Converter is written in Kotlin. Kotlin remains the only backend language that I have used professionally, and I highly recommend it. It has a strong ecosystem and some of the best modern syntax. Angus chose it to leverage the JVM ecosystem while writing simple code. He also uses the Ktor framework, which I've also used before and highly recommend. The database he is using is Postgres and the front end is Next.js with TypeScript. He uses AWS Lightsail to host his backend. It's an alternative to EC2 that has far fewer features. He doesn't need many features though. He just uses Ansible to set up virtual machines, create builds, and deploy builds. He doesn't even use Docker. He also uses BuildKite to deploy every commit to dev and production, so he can usually deploy to production within 5 minutes. He uses Stripe for payments processing and Brevo to send emails. He can deploy on every commit because the product has good unit tests that help with his confidence when deploying. Angus works using test-driven development, which means he always writes tests before writing any functionality. I have always struggled with this approach, but you can see its value in this project, especially since the project has a very input-output nature. You put bank statements in, you get a CSV out. Test-driven development with trunk-based development, automatic deployments, and very simple unabstracted technologies allow the development process to run with very little friction. He just keeps a file named to-do in the root directory that has a backlog of all the things he needs to do. And when he works, he just picks the first item in the backlog and moves it to the current date section. The lack of ceremony or flashy technologies helps Angus focus on just building a better product. This mindset of simplicity carries over into the product. There are a few examples where Angus uses creative ways to simplify the product. For example, the login system. Early in the project's life, Angus noticed that 50% of users who registered with email and password would upload a bank statement, while 90% of users who registered with Google did. So he just removed the ability to log in with email and password. If someone still requested to sign in with an email and password, he would send them a special link. And in cases where someone forgot their password and asked for a reset, he would manually decrypt the password into the database. While the product is still small, it's worth doing things that don't scale. Not all things are worth development time. Angus eventually removed the need to log in to use the application altogether. It's better to reduce the barrier to entry as much as possible and make it easy for people to give you money. Angus eventually made it so that people can even purchase the product without an account. Angus stopped paying for Google Ads after 6 months because it was costing too much money. There are a few changes he made after turning the ads off that resulted in him actually making more money without ads, despite having fewer users. The first one is advice that I hear all the time regarding self-funded B2B businesses. but this is a perfect example of it being applied in practice. Just raise the damn price. He changed the price from $20 for 3 months, or about $6 a month, to $14 a month, more than doubling the cost per user. He also implemented seat pricing at the request of a kind customer who messaged Angus to let him know he should charge higher fees. People with businesses are happy to spend money if a product is providing value. Raise the price and continue to raise it until the math doesn't work out. In a lot of cases, the drop in users will be offset by the higher price. In some cases, the number of customers won't drop and you'll just make more money. Angus also nerfed the free tier. The free tier was initially very generous, allowing 20 pages a day for logged in users. This was being abused by people with multiple accounts. He decreased this to 5 pages a day. The free tier should really only be used to build trust, not as an alternative to your product. Customers getting value from your product should be heavily incentivized to pay. Another creative way that Angus optimizes his product is by building quality internal tools and investing in long-term solutions. Building internal tools that help you go faster in the long run can be very valuable. I know that when I am trying to move as fast as possible, I tend to hard code more logic than I should. As soon as you have paying customers, it's worth building tools that make your life easier, especially with a small team. The benefits of automation are inversely proportional to the size of your team. If there is only one person working on a project, then that person's time is incredibly valuable. Angus's initial PDF converters were written in Kotlin, but he found a way to abstract the conversion so that he could write converters as YAML files. Despite the upfront cost, this is an excellent change that allowed him to create and update converters without even deploying the application. The core logic is still Kotlin, but the specification for different bank statements is stored as YAML. Another internal tool that Angus built was a simple tool that helped him calculate pricing for customers based on their location and requirements. This is a simple tool that gave Angus peace of mind and consistency when it came to the financial side of the application. Consider investing in your internal tooling. It will pay dividends in the long run. Product market fit is another important part of running a successful self-funded business. Building the right features is important, especially with only a single developer. This is another department where Angus has a very simple and pragmatic approach. He keeps a very tight feedback loop between himself and his customers. Initially, this was done by having a support email directly on the website. Eventually, he added one of those chatbots that will message support directly. Users would report bugs and request features. If the features made sense, he would implement them. Sometimes users would make requests that he disagreed with, like when a user asked if they could convert files other than bank statements. This feature didn't make a lot of sense, but may be helpful for some people, so Angus outsourced it to someone on Fiverr. Angus is always authentic and honest in his communication. He is very thorough when it comes to managing relations. One time, a customer made a feature request asking for the website to support scanned images. Angus found the person's phone number in her email signature and just called her directly to ask her questions about the problems she was facing. A year later, when he was traveling to Australia, he caught up with her for coffee. He also caught up with a few other clients whom he had made connections with over the years. Building small features for small clients tends to be easy to manage. It's not hard to say no or make compromises when the feature only affects one client. This usually becomes harder when you get bigger opportunities from clients with more demands. In 2022, the Australian Tax Office contacted Angus, asking some questions about Bank Statement Converter. They wanted to use it to process some data regarding financial crimes. This would, by all means, have been a huge account. But unfortunately, the conversations fizzled out and the deal fell through. I initially thought that this was a missed opportunity, and that perhaps Angus should have tried harder to make the sale. But I actually think he made the right choice. He didn't overextend himself at the cost of everything else just to land a big account. There is a lot more responsibility, compliance, and general headache that comes with having a major client like the ATO. You have to answer whenever they call and guarantee SLAs and data security. If you already have to overextend yourself before even making the sale, then it probably won't be any better afterwards. And sometimes the big payday is not worth that. There is always a dichotomy in self-funded businesses. More clients where you don't answer to any single one of them, but you have more relationships to manage, or a few clients that have a huge control over your life, but are fewer relationships to manage. Obviously, both can work, but I think leaning towards a bigger user pool can give you the freedom to tell people no. A few months later, Angus received another email from a potential big account. This was a person who made a SaaS product for accounting. The person requested API access to Bank Statement Converter and wanted the data to be returned in JSON with normalized headers. It took Angus a few days to implement this. This particular client was using bank statement converter on a scale it had never been used before. That meant that a lot of new banks needed to be supported. Angus spent the next 2 months resolving issues converting bank statement types that the client's team discovered. He soon realized that this could go on forever and decided to charge the client for the work he was doing. This was an interesting situation, since the work that Angus was doing was applicable to everyone. But Angus decided that it was still worth charging for his time, since he wouldn't be working on these documents if it weren't for this particular client. The client also sent a strict service level agreement, which Angus politely declined by sending his own equally strict legal agreement. You have to work with your clients, but you shouldn't bend over backwards. It's important to keep a healthy relationship with clients, especially the biggest ones, and be willing to break up when it gets toxic. Angus was grateful for the opportunities provided by these bigger clients, but he was comfortable enough to make pragmatic, sustainable decisions resulting in a better product overall. Angus tried many different marketing channels to grow Bank Statement Converter even more. Some highlights are the referral program, share on Facebook functionality, and posting blogs on Hacker News. In the end, he found none of them were very fruitful. All of his initial clients were from AdSense, and once that stopped, the product kept growing through SEO and word of mouth. It definitely helps when the URL is an exact match of what people will be searching for. With AdSense and SEO, Angus had a mixture of organic and paid marketing, but I do think that it is important that he explored some alternatives. Different marketing strategies will work for different products, and experimentation is the only way to find out what works for your product. You just have to experiment in an efficient way, as to not waste too much time and money. It's best to run small experiments with people you trust. There are many lessons to take away from this project. I love the simplicity of the problem that it solves, and how that simplicity bleeds through the product decisions and technical decisions alike. There is no need to overcomplicate things. Angus does a great job at walking the tightrope between making money and living a happy life. And Bank Statement Converter is a perfect example of a modern SaaS startup that bucks the trend in all the right ways. If I run a business, I want it to be exactly this kind of business. A business delivering tangible value for customers and nothing more.